Tommy Wilson came to this house a boy of 13. He left 3 years later in 1874 on the brink of adulthood to become the man who would study history, lead a major university, govern New Jersey, and ultimately be elected President of the United States. How did Wilson's life in Columbia during Reconstruction influence his choices? No one can say for sure, but clues offer suggestions.
I think as a teenage boy here in Columbia, and even later as a scholar, Woodrow Wilson viewed Reconstruction as potentially a very good idea that really went awry. Living in the shadows of the state capitol here in Columbia, I think this was a moment where Woodrow Wilson, still called Tommy, really paid attention to the politics and government of his city, of his state, and of his country, his reunited country.
As a professor, Wilson studied Reconstruction. He wrote, "Reconstruction is still a revolutionary matter. Those who delve in it find it like a banked fire." Reconstruction in South Carolina ended with the election of Wade Hampton III as governor in 1876, just 2 years after Tommy left this house. Wilson still felt the heat of that banked fire in the White House almost 40 years later. In 1915, while in the White House, Wilson viewed The Birth of a Nation, an epic silent film based on a book written by one of his college acquaintances. The Birth of a Nation offered a racist interpretation of the Civil War and Reconstruction. It was set in South Carolina, with some scenes in Wilson's former hometown of Columbia. Its biased and inaccurate portrayal of newly empowered blacks was popular among most white Americans. Though African Americans elected to office in South Carolina during Reconstruction were educated and capable, the movie depicts them far differently. Meanwhile, it presents the Ku Klux Klan as a positive force. While watching The Birth of a Nation, would Wilson have recalled his years in Columbia? What he thought of the film, he did not say. However, the movie's producers capitalized on the White House connection, claiming the president endorsed it. Black directors, artists, and scholars, as well as the NAACP, challenged the movie's message and historical accuracy. By blending his own soundtrack with excerpts from Griffith's original movie, Paul Miller, also known as DJ Spooky, offers modern audiences a new and challenging way of looking at the film.
For me, as an artist, this is a record, a document that I want to remix.
Confederate troops come to save the town from the savagery of the black Union troops.
And it's not about repressing or ignoring the history of this film. It is, yes, a racist film. Definitely no holds barred indictment of the idea of black political progress and the fact that it caused fear in whites, and fear sells. It just means that we need to understand the time and the context and the place. Wilson at the time would have been facing the suffragist movement. He would have been facing agitation from people returning from World War I. He would have been also facing a lot of economic upheaval, as people were trying to figure out the new industrial economy. I think is more, I'm holding up a mirror to society and showing that some things still need to change.
Like all presidents, Wilson created policies that were popular with some and condemned by others, signing an amendment that gave women the right to vote, creating the Federal Reserve to stabilize banking, segregating federal employees in the nation's capital, and developing a post-war plan to secure peace through his 14 points and the League of Nations. These were the things that people most remembered when Wilson died in 1924. In 1926, 2 years after his death, white Columbians celebrated the overthrow of Reconstruction with a parade. It commemorated the 50th anniversary of Wade Hampton's election as governor and the red shirts who used violence and fraud to elect him. 2 years after that, in 1928, a group of women took the first steps to save this house, launching their own commemoration of the first Southerner elected to the White House since before the Civil War. This house is a physical connection to Reconstruction and a window into both how this era has been represented historically and is remembered today. It also allows 21st century visitors to ask important questions about how Reconstruction shaped a boy who would be president.